June 4th, 1944. 11:11 hours. North Atlantic, 150 miles off Cape Blanco, West Africa. Oberleutnant Harold Lang clung to a piece of wooden decking from U-505, watching his submarine settle deeper into the Atlantic swells, with its conning tower barely visible above the waves. Around him in the water, 58 other crew members struggled to stay afloat, despite life jackets that were designed for North Sea conditions rather than mid-Atlantic swells that lifted men 3 meters up and dropped them into troughs where visibility disappeared, and drowning seemed inevitable regardless of flotation equipment. Lange had ordered the submarine scuttled 11 minutes earlier when depth charges from American destroyers had damaged the boat beyond any possibility of diving or fighting. The charges had ruptured the pressure hull in 3 places, flooded the engine room, and knocked out all electrical systems including the pumps that might have kept U-505 afloat long enough to fight or escape. Scuttling was standard procedure. Better to destroy the submarine than allow enemies to capture the Enigma machine and code books that would compromise every U-boat operating in the Atlantic. But the scuttling charges had failed to detonate properly. U-505 was sinking slowly, rather than exploding and disappearing beneath the waves within seconds. The failure meant the submarine might still be captured, might still provide intelligence that could destroy the entire U-boat arm. And it meant that Lange and his crew were floating in the Atlantic approximately 200 meters from an American destroyer that was approaching rapidly with obvious intention of either capturing the submarine or ensuring its complete destruction. Lange expected machine gun fire. The Americans would strafe the survivors in the water, standard practice when dealing with submarine crews who'd spent years sinking merchant ships without warning, drowning thousands of Allied sailors who'd had no chance to abandon their vessels before torpedoes struck. The U-boat war was brutal and personal in ways that surface naval combat rarely achieved. Submariners on both sides understood that capture was unlikely, and mercy was never guaranteed when the other side finally got you in their sights, after years of hunting each other across thousands of miles of ocean. He watched the destroyer, USS Guadalcanal, though he didn't know its name yet, close to within 50 meters. American sailors lined the rails, weapons visible but not firing. Lange waited for the inevitable. His crew was exhausted from 11 minutes of struggling in Atlantic swells that were cold enough to induce hypothermia within 30 minutes, despite the African latitude. They had no strength to swim away, no ability to dive beneath the surface, nothing to do except wait, while American sailors decided whether to show mercy or revenge. Then ropes hit the water. Life preservers followed. A boat was being lowered from davits on Guadalcanal's side. American sailors were shouting in English that Lange couldn't understand completely, but whose tone suggested urgency rather than hostility. They weren't preparing to shoot survivors. They were preparing to rescue them, the hunters and the hunted. The Battle of the Atlantic had been fought with particular brutality since September 1939, when German U-boats began systematically attacking Allied merchant shipping in campaign designed to starve Britain into surrender by cutting the supply lines that kept the island nation alive. The early years had been catastrophic for Allied shipping. German submarines sank vessels faster than shipyards could replace them, and casualties among merchant sailors exceeded 50,000 dead by 1943. U-boat crews had developed reputations as ruthless killers who attacked without warning, sank ships within minutes, and rarely stopped to assist survivors who were left to drift in lifeboats or cling to wreckage until rescue arrived or didn't. The characterization was partially justified. U-boats operated under rules of engagement that prioritized surprise and escape over humanitarian concerns about enemy survivors. But it was also propaganda that reduced complex maritime warfare to simple narrative about German atrocity and Allied innocence. American entry into the Atlantic War in 1942 had initially favored the U-boats. Unescorted merchant ships sailing along the American coast were easy targets for submarines that operated with near impunity during the first 6 months after Pearl Harbor. The period became known as the Second Happy Time among U-boat crews, echoing the happy time of 1940, when British defenses had been weakest and German submarines had achieved their highest success rates. But by 1944, the balance had shifted dramatically. Allied anti-submarine warfare had evolved from desperate improvisation to systematic campaign that combined escort carriers, long-range patrol aircraft, improved sonar and radar, and code breaking that allowed Allied forces to route convoys around known U-boat positions while directing hunter-killer groups toward submarines whose locations had been identified through intelligence gathering. The hunters were becoming the hunted, and U-boat losses were climbing toward unsustainable rates that would eventually claim approximately 3/4 of all men who served there. U-505 had been operating in West African waters since departing Brest, France, in March 1944. The patrol had been largely unsuccessful. No confirmed sinkings, several mechanical problems that had limited the boat's effectiveness, and growing awareness among the crew that the Atlantic was becoming too dangerous for submarines that lacked technological advantages they'd enjoyed during earlier years of the war. Morale was declining, discipline was showing strain, and several crew members were privately questioning whether they would survive to return to France. The answer had come on the morning of June 4th, when USS Guadalcanal's task group had detected U-505 through a combination of radio direction finding and sonar contact. The American escort carrier and its accompanying destroyers had conducted systematic search that eventually located the submarine and launched depth charge attack that damaged U-505 severely enough to force it to surface. The shock of survival. Harold Lang watched American sailors pull him from the Atlantic with emotions he couldn't process coherently. Relief at not drowning mixed with confusion about why enemies would save him. Shame at having lost his submarine mixed with gratitude at being alive. And resignation that his war was over mixed with uncertainty about what captivity would mean. The American sailors handling the rescue were professional and efficient. They pulled survivors aboard using rope nets and life preservers, provided blankets and dry clothing, checked for injuries, and spoke in tones that were businesslike rather than hostile. Several Germans required immediate medical attention. The chief engineer had broken ribs from being thrown against machinery during the depth charge attack. 2 sailors had severe lacerations from broken glass, and several were showing early symptoms of hypothermia from extended immersion in water that was cold despite the African latitude. The Americans treated the injured Germans with the same care they would have provided to their own personnel. American medics cleaned wounds, administered morphine for severe pain, splinted broken bones, and monitored hypothermia cases with protocols that prioritized immediate warming over interrogation or processing as prisoners. Lange found himself sitting on Guadalcanal's deck, wrapped in a U.S. Navy blanket, watching American sailors move between German survivors, providing assistance that seemed motivated by genuine concern rather than merely fulfilling procedural requirements. An American sailor offered him coffee, actual coffee, hot and strong, not the ersatz substitute that German military had been serving for 2 years. Lange took the cup with hands that shook partly from cold and partly from emotional reaction he couldn't control. The sailor noticed the shaking and said something in English that Lange didn't understand, but the tone was sympathetic rather than mocking. The sailor gestured toward the blanket and the coffee, communicating through pantomime that Lang should drink and warm himself. Then the sailor moved on to the next German survivor, repeating the same routine of providing comfort to men who'd been trying to sink his ship hours earlier. Lange later described that moment as more disorienting than combat or capture. He'd spent 6 years in the Kriegsmarine, 4 years serving in U-boats, learning to view Allied sailors as enemies who represented everything Germany was fighting against. The propaganda had emphasized Allied barbarism, their supposed willingness to violate laws of warfare, their treatment of prisoners. Lange had believed much of this propaganda because it reinforced what he needed to believe to justify his own actions, that torpedoing merchant ships without warning was regrettable necessity rather than war crime, that drowning merchant sailors was unfortunate but unavoidable consequence of submarine warfare. But now American sailors were demonstrating behavior that contradicted everything the propaganda had claimed. They were showing mercy to defeated enemies, providing medical care and comfort, treating German submariners as human beings deserving respect rather than as animals to be disposed of after capture. The cognitive dissonance was profound. Either the propaganda had been lies, or these particular Americans were exceptional rather than representative. Lange had been educated enough to suspect the former, but desperately wanted to believe the latter, because acknowledging that propaganda had been systematically false would require re-examining everything he'd done during 6 years of military service. The boarding that saved a submarine. While Guadalcanal's crew was rescuing German survivors, Lieutenant Albert David led a boarding party toward U-505 in a motor whaleboat that crossed the 200 meters separating the destroyer from the submarine in approximately 4 minutes. David had volunteered to lead the boarding despite obvious dangers. The submarine might sink suddenly, scuttling charges might detonate late, German crew members might still be aboard and willing to fight, or booby traps might have been set to kill anyone attempting to board. The boarding party consisted of 8 sailors armed with pistols and carrying tools for closing valves, stopping flooding, and securing hatches. Their orders were to prevent the submarine from sinking if possible and to search for intelligence materials if the boat could be kept afloat. Neither objective was guaranteed. U-505 was visibly settling deeper in the water, and the conditions inside would be unknown until someone actually entered through the conning tower hatch. David climbed the conning tower ladder and looked down into the submarine's interior. Water was visible rising through the lower levels, but the flooding wasn't catastrophic yet. More importantly, the interior appeared to be abandoned. The German crew had evacuated completely, rather than leaving anyone behind to ensure the submarine's destruction. This suggested either that the crew hadn't realized the scuttling charges had failed, or that they'd prioritized survival over ensuring their boat couldn't be captured. The boarding party descended into U-505 and began systematic effort to keep it afloat. They located flooding sources and attempted to close valves that were admitting seawater. They examined the scuttling charges and confirmed they hadn't detonated. The charges had been set, but something in the firing mechanism had failed, leaving explosive devices armed but not triggered. Disabling them required careful work by sailors who had minimal training in German demolition systems and who understood that any mistake would kill them, along with destroying the submarine they were trying to save. While some boarding party members worked on preventing sinking, others searched for intelligence materials. They found the Enigma machine in the radio room, along with current code books and operational orders that documented U-boat dispositions throughout the Atlantic. The intelligence value was immediately obvious, even to sailors who couldn't read German. These were exactly the materials that Gallery had hoped to capture. Documents that would give Allied forces ability to read German naval communications and track submarine movements with precision that could transform the Battle of the Atlantic. The boarding party worked for 3 hours inside U-505, while Guadalcanal stood by ready to take the submarine under tow if it could be kept afloat. The effort succeeded barely. Flooding was stopped, the submarine stabilized, and a tow line was attached. U-505 would eventually be towed to Bermuda, where it could be examined thoroughly, and its intelligence materials could be exploited without risk of German forces learning that their communications had been compromised. The successful capture was unprecedented. U-505 became the first German submarine captured at sea by American forces, the first enemy vessel of any type captured at sea by the U.S. Navy since 1815, and one of the most valuable intelligence coups of the Atlantic campaign. The captives who couldn't understand kindness. The 59 German survivors sat on Guadalcanal's deck, watching American sailors prepare to tow their submarine. The sight created complex emotions that none of them would fully articulate for years afterward. Relief that they'd survived. Shame that their boat had been captured intact. Confusion about American behavior that didn't match anything they'd been conditioned to expect. Kapitänleutnant Wilhelm Becker, one of U-505's officers, later wrote about those hours, "We expected to be shot. U-boat crews rarely survived when their boats were sunk. We'd accepted this as probable fate every time we went to sea. When the Americans pulled us from the water instead of leaving us to drown, we assumed this was temporary mercy. They'd interrogate us, then execute us as pirates who'd sunk ships without warning for 4 years. The alternative, that they would actually treat us according to Geneva Convention and international law, seemed impossible given what we'd done to their merchant sailors. But execution never came. Interrogation was professional and limited to information that captured personnel were required to provide under international law: name, rank, service number. The Americans didn't torture, didn't threaten, didn't even raise voices during questioning. They asked technical questions about U-505's capabilities and got minimal answers that complied with prisoners' obligations to resist providing information useful to the enemy. The interrogators accepted this resistance without apparent frustration or retaliation. Medical care continued throughout the time Germans were aboard Guadalcanal. The sailor with broken ribs received X-rays and proper splinting. The laceration cases had their wounds properly sutured rather than just bandaged. Hypothermia cases were warmed gradually using protocols that prevented shock from too rapid temperature increase. American medical personnel treated German prisoners with same care they'd provide to American sailors, without distinction or discrimination that might have been justified given the circumstances. Food was provided at regular intervals, not luxury meals, but the same rations that American sailors were eating. Adequate calories, reasonable quality, served in quantities that matched what captors were consuming themselves. The equality was striking to Germans who'd grown accustomed to declining rations as German military logistics deteriorated. The Americans clearly had abundant supplies and were willing to share them with prisoners who had no claim to such generosity. Harold Lang tried to process this treatment through framework of military duty and propaganda that had shaped his understanding of the war. The Americans should be barbaric enemies who'd treat prisoners cruelly. Instead, they were demonstrating behavior that exceeded Geneva Convention requirements and suggested cultural commitment to humanitarian values that propaganda had insisted democratic societies lacked. The disconnect between expectation and reality was forcing cognitive re-evaluation that Lange found uncomfortable but couldn't avoid. One moment crystallized the confusion. An American sailor approached Lange with a pack of cigarettes and offered one through gesture. Lange accepted hesitantly. The American lit the cigarette for him, said something in English that included the word "okay," repeated twice, and walked away. The entire interaction took perhaps 20 seconds, but violated everything Lange thought he understood about how enemies behaved toward each other. Enemies didn't offer cigarettes. Enemies didn't show casual kindness. Enemies didn't treat captured submariners like human beings deserving basic courtesy. Yet this American sailor had done exactly that without apparent effort or calculation. The kindness seemed automatic rather than strategic. This was just how American sailors treated people, regardless of nationality or previous hostilities. The legacy in steel and memory U-505 survived the war and was preserved as museum ship in Chicago, where it remains on display at the Museum of Science and Industry. Visitors can tour the submarine, see the cramped conditions where 59 men had lived for months at a time, and understand the claustrophobic reality of submarine warfare that had made this form of combat particularly terrifying for everyone involved. The submarine's capture and the rescue of its crew became part of American naval history that was simultaneously celebrated and complicated. Celebrated because capturing an enemy submarine intact was extraordinary achievement that provided valuable intelligence. Complicated because the capture had required showing mercy to enemies, at moment when revenge would have been easier and arguably justified by years of brutal submarine warfare. Gallery received the Distinguished Service Medal for the capture. Albert David, who'd led the boarding party, received the Medal of Honor, the highest American military decoration, for his courage in entering U-505 despite obvious dangers. The crew members who'd rescued German survivors received no special decorations because rescue at sea was considered normal duty rather than extraordinary achievement. This reflected Navy culture that treated humanitarian obligations as baseline expectations rather than heroic actions deserving special recognition. Harold Lang lived until 1999, dying at age 82 after a post-war career as merchant ship officer and maritime safety inspector. He visited U-505 in Chicago multiple times, giving talks about his experience to students and historians who wanted first-hand accounts of submarine warfare and captivity. His message was consistent across decades. The Americans who rescued me demonstrated humanity in circumstances where cruelty would have been understandable. They showed me that even enemies can choose mercy, that even in war, there are limits that civilized people observe, and that the values a nation claims to uphold are tested most clearly when following those values is most difficult. The story of U-505's capture and the rescue of its crew represented American military culture at its best, effective in combat, principled in victory, and unwilling to abandon humanitarian values, even when doing so would have been operationally simpler. Gallery's decision to rescue German survivors, despite controversy, demonstrated leadership that balanced military necessity against moral obligation. The American sailors who'd pulled drowning Germans from the Atlantic had acted according to traditions that naval forces had maintained for centuries. Survivors at sea deserve rescue, regardless of nationality or previous hostilities. The Germans who'd expected death but received blankets and coffee carried memories that shaped their understanding of America for the rest of their lives. They'd been enemies who'd tried to sink Allied shipping. They'd become prisoners who'd been treated humanely despite having shown little mercy themselves. And they'd become witnesses who could testify that American claims about respecting international law and humanitarian principles weren't just propaganda, but actual policies that American forces followed even when following them was inconvenient or unpopular. The lesson transcended the specific incident. Societies reveal their true character not through how they treat friends and allies, but through how they treat enemies and those who are powerless. American sailors pulling German submariners from the Atlantic demonstrated character that was worth defending, values that justified the sacrifices that war demanded, and civilization that was worth preserving against forces that had abandoned humanitarian constraints in pursuit of total victory. The rescue wasn't just military operation or humanitarian gesture. It was proof that mercy remained possible even in circumstances that seemed designed to eliminate it, and that choosing mercy rather than revenge distinguished civilization from barbarism regardless of who won or lost the military conflict.